You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.
So hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Changing Reality. So welcome one, welcome all. We're excited as always to have you on the show. If you are a returning member of our audience, thank you once again for joining us. As always, it's amazing to have you with us here on Changing Reality. And if this is your first time tuning in, first of all, where have you been all this time? Don't you know this is like the place to be, the best stories, the best people, and so on. But Changing Reality is essentially a show where we get to speak to phenomenal people from all walks of life who are, in essence, changing their own reality. And through this show, we'll be hanging out and interviewing social change makers, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, industry experts, business owners, to even artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the world, and many of whom have spent some time here on the Penn campus as well. So by hearing these inspiring stories, hopefully we'll be able to pick out little nuggets of wisdom that we can apply in our own lives and get a little clarity on where it is we want to head, as well as some advice and thoughts of how we can shorten that learning curve. And I wanted to do this show simply because I am a huge believer in the power of stories. I believe that there are so many people out there who do brilliant things, make waves in the lives around them. And I'm passionate about kind of documenting those journeys for the next generation of change makers, of entrepreneurs who want to be able to do the same. And I believe that stories are the best way that we can learn, other than experiencing it for ourselves. And the conversation the nuance and conversation that we can pick up is what really helps shape the way we think about our journeys. And to tell you about how passionate I am and how much stories have impacted my own life. Hi, my name is Harsha, and I am your host for Changing Reality. A little bit about me is, other than being a student at the University of Pennsylvania, I actually founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance, where I'm currently CEO and co-founder. Ascendance is an international social enterprise that started in Malaysia, which is where I'm from, but today has gone on to collaborate with not just our Malaysian Ministry of Education, but over 26 countries to provide an alternative education platform for any student who wants to change their reality. So we work with students from elementary all the way up to college through various sessions, programs, projects, experiential learning activities, and so much more that helps them discover what they love doing, get hands-on real-world experiences, and eventually even incubate their own businesses and social enterprises. And we've been really, really fortunate to work with over 50,000 students to date, impacting over 900 communities and having incubated countless number of student-run projects and social enterprises run by students as young as 8 to 25 years old. And the reason we've been able to do all of that has been stories. It's been because of kind individuals who've been willing to come out there, share their stories with us, and provide a little insight, inspiration, the good and the bad, to the students that we work with and to me and my team as well. And just like that, I hope that this show is that same platform for all of you, so that through these conversations, through this show, you'll be able to recreate your own kind of experiences and education that you need to excel in your story as well. So with that, moving into today's episode, we have an amazing speaker joining us today who's had an absolutely exciting career, from everything that you can think of in the world of finance and entrepreneurship, investment banking, private equity. But most importantly, he's an entrepreneur, or in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, with astounding success. So I think one of the first entrepreneurial ventures he joined was called Lattice, where he joined as chief of staff. Eventually, Lattice was actually acquired by Apple. It was founded in 2015 to develop software that could develop the knowledge bases behind powerful enterprise applications. And they were backed by some of the world's top venture investors, including GV, Madrona, many others as well. And as we said, was acquired by Apple in 2017, where he continued his career there as the startup joined Series Knowledge team. Moving forward from that, he co-founded his own startup where he served as COO of Sentropy. They provide a new way to protect the internet, leveraging vast volumes of data. And essentially, they supercharge content moderation with proactive, comprehensive, bias-aware detection capabilities that are easy to deploy and highly scalable. His startup Centropy was also acquired by Discord in July 2021. So amazing success as an entrepreneur. It seems every venture he's part of seems to get some kind of success. And today he serves as group product manager, the developer platform at Discord. So without further ado, let's welcome our amazing guest speaker onto our virtual stage to share with us how he got started and his journey so far.
Hey, Harsha.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. How has your week been? Tell us, what is the exciting life that you live like?
Well, I've got to say, your recap of the last 15 years of my life makes it sound a lot more exciting. My week is going great, but it feels a lot different when you're in the weeds day in and day out. But excited to chat through kind of my story, my history. Hopefully it stays as interesting as what you just hyped up. But yeah, excited to be here.
Hey, it's not just hype. That was, a downplayed summary, if anything. But, tell us a little bit about, how you started. You obviously are talented in the world of entrepreneurship. Have you always been bit by the entrepreneurial bug, or is this something that, you came to later? Tell us where your journey and, your interest in this whole thing actually began.
Sure. I guess, yeah, I've always had that entrepreneurial bug, but I never really knew what it was going to look like. It took me a long time to figure out, what ideas were out there that I was really passionate about, what I wanted to make that risky bet on. But I can go way back to when I was in high school or early college days. I was thinking about, one day I want to start my own business. And in retrospect, that feels kind of foolish. I wanted to start a business so that I could say I'd started a business. At the time, I was looking at businesses out there that I could understand and kind of mapped my future to those. There was definitely a point, I think, when I was applying to college, to undergrad, where building a bookstore was the pinnacle of business success to me. Obviously, I was not thinking about the impact that the internet would have on the book industry at that time. I'm really happy I didn't go on to start a bookstore, but over time, my entrepreneurial ambitions definitely kind of evolved. I went into undergrad pursuing an engineering degree, but it was for a very different reason than most people who have entrepreneurial ambitions would pursue engineering. I was looking at that as a way to get into finance because I wanted to get exposure to kind of the management side of large and successful companies. I had this path laid out in my head, for better or worse, that was more or less, I need to see how successful companies are run so that when I go and start, whatever it is that I feel passionate about, I can leverage what I've learned from those interactions or from their success and bring that along with me kind of downstream into, the startup stages of company. Very roundabout way of getting into tech. My advice to everybody that I talk to now is you don't have to go into finance in order to get into tech. You can just go straight into tech. But I did want to get back there one day. I decided that I was going to go into investment banking, use that as a stepping stone to get into private equity, spend a couple of years in private equity, and then find my way back into tech and take all of the skills and all the experience that I had from finance and find a way to make it valuable inside of the world of Silicon Valley and startups. So that's where it started. It's a roundabout way again of going about your career, but it did kind of give me a unique lens to kind of evaluate businesses through that I do think helped me in at least my situation. But from there, I got deep into the world of startups, and my career path kind of changed pretty significantly when I moved out of Wall Street and into Silicon Valley. You want me to just jump into
No,
what it looked like from there?
No, very, very cool. I think I cut out for a second there if you can still hear me. But you mentioned that you have like, this plan when you were an undergrad, you were really thoughtful about each step. Full disclosure, how, like, out of 100%, how accurate was your plan, like, that you set out, like, in that undergrad time, in a sense, when you look back now?
It depends how hard you squint. At a high level, I think it was pretty accurate, but it was accurate because I never like deeply explored anything else. So I made it accurate because when I decided that was the plan, I kind of continued pushing forward on that path. When you look at the details of where I spent, months or years of my time, the details that I had laid out when I was in, undergrad for myself definitely looked different. I was not working in the type of private equity in like the investment areas that I would have selected if I could just like single-handedly choose my destiny. When I moved into the startup world, I was working at a very different different type of startup than what I originally imagined I would, kind of go and jump right into. But the overall path was more or less what I was expecting. The details mattered though, and the specific companies that I worked for, or in the Wall Street world, the specific companies that I worked with as clients or portfolio companies really influenced my own learning about how to evaluate business opportunity, what I thought were relevant or interesting trends to go out and pursue in the world. And so while the path matters, it's really like the specific experiences that I had along the way that I think were the most influential or foundational components of kind of the later parts of my career.
Very cool. Now, let's go with the first step in that journey, in a sense. I think you did investment banking, one of the biggest players, in the investment banking scene. And at the same time, you were going in with an engineering degree and you had the goal of, management in finance. So tell me how you kind of lined up all these moving parts that seem a little, not exactly similar at first glance. And why was that the first step that you thought would be a great, like kicking off point for you?
I applied to investment banking internships when I was a sophomore in undergrad. I got rejected from all of them. I ended up getting an internship at a hedge fund called Guggenheim Partners. This was in the summer of 2008. So very auspicious time to be in finance. But it was in the middle of everything. Like Lehman Brothers had not yet happened, but Bear Stearns had. And so the perception of what was, the perception that we now have of how bad 2008 was had not yet really landed. At least, it hadn't landed to me as a 20-year-old. I'm sure that people that I was working for were much smarter and aware of the groundswell that was about to disrupt the finance industry. I was not. But it didn't feel the way that it does now when you look back on 2008, 2009. So I was excited to be at a hedge fund. I didn't really know what a hedge fund was. I knew what it was in terms of like, how do you describe it to your mom or dad? But I didn't really know what it meant. And that gave me some really good experience that then helped me in the summer of 2009 when I was applying to investment banking internships, where the world had kind of realized that, the finance industry and the economy in general are bad, and it's we're in for a rough go of it. I got lucky at the end of the day. There was a managing director at JP Morgan that I interviewed with. He came on campus and he was interviewing dozens of people, and I think I was the only person with an engineering degree that he talked to that day. And he called me a couple weeks later with my offer, and he pointed it out and he said, I like that you had an experience that nobody else that I talked to had. I'm taking a huge bet on you, because everybody else that we talk to has gone through intro to accounting. They've had corporate finance classes. They have gone through econ classes that are nowhere on your resume. You're going to have to learn a whole bunch of things that they don't have to learn. But I think that you have, some unique experience with how you think about the world because of what engineering has taught you in terms of like problem solving and your approach to dealing with unknowns, that I'm excited about. I'm going to take a bet on you. And I think there were 2 offers that were given out from JP Morgan for investment banking that year, at my undergrad. And I was one of them. So I mean, that was a long time ago, and I still think back on it and just, I'm extremely grateful that that guy took a bet on me, because it influenced everything after that. I got an offer after that internship to come back to JP Morgan full time. That, like, you can draw a direct path to that leading to my career in private equity. And it kind of goes back to like one guy who took a bet on me. Luck is extremely important when it comes to entrepreneurship, but it's important in every aspect of your career too. You can't manufacture luck, but there are some ways that you can influence, like how many opportunities you get to test whether you're going to be lucky that time. I got rejected from probably 40 different investment banking jobs before one of them actually landed for me. So some people might look at the 40 that I got rejected from and say, like, you had bad luck. The one that works out suddenly changes your luck into I've had a very lucky career.
I have a lot of friends right now who just kind of graduated senior year, and they're thinking about, oh my gosh, what's happening? And I think they're in a very weird place where everyone like they talk to is like, oh, it's a bad time for finance. It's a bad time for venture and so on. Like in terms of like the economy as a whole. And they themselves, they have a kind of inkling and a plan of what they want to follow through. But I think they're still at, rejection number 29 and 30, and they haven't gone to rejection 40 yet. And in that process, it can seem very terrifying in a sense, because I think we all are in college thinking we know what the world is going to be like after. And then as we start kind of going through the process of testing out that plan, as you said, it's not always, sunshine and roses. There are the downs, there are the ups in a sense. And I'm a big believer that luck is really preparation meets opportunity. I mean, I heard someone say that once. I was like, that's a really good saying. For you, in a sense, how did you go about, orientating your luck in a sense, or at the very least, not giving up at rejection 29 and rejection 30, and making it to, opportunity 41?
Yeah, I think you develop that philosophy and mentality by being on the short end of the stick a whole bunch of times, right? You gain that skill through experience with the unlucky scenarios. And when you get beaten down by unlucky outcomes over and over again, you can take it one of 2 ways. You can let it keep you down, or you can say, I'm going to figure out how to turn some disadvantage into an advantage. One of the most impactful individual lectures that I've ever had in my entire education career was at Wharton during business school. I forgot what the name of the class was, but we were talking about different strategies for different stages of business. When you're going through competition, what are different ways of thinking about competing with the market? And we had this lecture on, being judo meaning how can you take disadvantages and working them to your advantage. I know absolutely nothing about martial arts, but what was told to me was that in judo, you can use the weight of your opponent to their disadvantage and to your advantage. You're able to kind of use the nature of your position in that battle to throw off your opponent, and you use something that is perceived to be their advantage against them. You use their weight to make them fall all the harder. That was impactful just because it kind of encouraged me to think about every failure as an opportunity to learn something from it and move it forward into something that could be helpful for me in the future. Going back to investment banking internships, every time somebody said no, I wanted more. I wanted them to tell me why. what could I have done differently that would have helped, my candidacy in this application process. They almost never gave that advice. They never like answered that question fully. They wanted to just move on with their day. But every now and then you'd get some kind of like blurb in the rejection email, and there was some consistency to it. And it was like, look, there are candidates with more relevant backgrounds, and it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. I was not, the template of person that most investment banks were looking for. I didn't have the background. That's a disadvantage until you turn it into an advantage. The advantage is, okay, but if you have everybody that has exactly the same experience, you actually have no way to guarantee that you're able to, see the world differently. Even just like as an analyst in an investment bank, you don't have the ability to like really change anything, right? You're there to work. You do a really hard job for a couple of years. But in the interview that I had with JP Morgan, we spent a long time talking about how can you build financial models more efficiently. You don't have to take macroeconomics in order to have a theory about, how can you do things more efficiently. That turned into an engineering problem for me. And I was able to frame my value to JP Morgan as saying, look, I've got experience working with software that other people that are interviewing for this role don't. Let's talk about that. And I'm going to position that as an advantage that I have rather than treating it as a disadvantage. So it came through a lot of failure. And I think that's, that didn't just happen during a couple of summers in undergrad. I have failed way more than I've succeeded, but what you do with that failure has always been really, really important to me.
I love the way you frame that. I really, really do. And there's the process of getting your foot in the door, and then there's the process of walking through the building, in a sense, as I look at it. So after you get there, you kind of have to be in that environment and perform and essentially, I wouldn't say compete, but at least stand out in some way or learn what you want to learn in that process. You were in investment banking, then you were in private equity, two very finance heavy things. And I'm someone who, don't tell anyone, I'm not a Wharton student. I'm a College of Arts and Science student. So, not exactly like the most finance person that you meet from Penn. And a lot of what I've learned, I think very gratefully actually, has been through experience of being an entrepreneur, talking to people in VC, working on projects with a lot of these organizations, versus, as you said, necessarily going for an intro to finance class or an intro to this class, which again, I'm not complaining. I think people who do that are much more brilliant and smarter than me, but it's a different way of learning. Tell me about your process of learning all of these more technical finance stuff, in a sense. How is it like for you to learn essentially on the job and be able to not only absorb what was happening around you, but be able to apply that in a way that was meaningful to your job and to your personal development?
That's a very introspective question. I'm not sure that I've fully ever thought through how I learn or how I can answer that in a way that sounds like it's full of wisdom, at least. What I can tell you about my learning process is that almost every hard skill that I've ever had to learn has a point where you realize you're over the wall. This I'm referring to the runner's wall. When you start running and it just feels like your lungs are about to give out, your legs are about to give out, I can't continue. Then you hit this point where you cross the wall and it just gets easier. It doesn't last forever. Like if you're running a marathon, things eventually get harder. But I have felt that wall in every career change that I've gone through, every job that I've had, every hard skill that I've had to learn. There's a point where you feel like this concept is so hard and I don't get it. Why is everybody else able to do this thing without a second thought for how to deploy that skill or go through this this job week to week? Why am I not getting it? And then you all the pieces kind of fit together. So maybe that's just representative of me being a very slow learner. I never thought that I'm exceptionally smart or quick at learning, but it does take if you have persistence, you can learn anything. And by being able to learn anything, you can develop any skill and you can do any job. You have to want to learn that thing hard enough to be able to push until you hit that wall. And once you cross that wall, things really do fit into place, right? to take my financial modeling analogy from investment banking internships and pull it forward into the rest of my career, there was a point where I could not figure out how to get, financial models to work. And that's like investment banking 101 or corporate finance 101. And then everything clicks to a point where when I was coming out of business school and trying to convince startups in Silicon Valley to hire an MBA when the last thing they wanted was a non-engineer to consider, the way that I convinced people to consider my resume and eventually to get kind of the first job that I had in tech was by using my knowledge of financial models to evaluate their business, right? The company that I kind of interned at coming out or during business school was Lattice, like you mentioned. The COO of Lattice would ask me like, okay, well, if I'm going to hire you, what are you going to be able to do for us? We're a Series A company. We have like 10 people on staff. I have 1,000 things to do. What can I give you to own? And my approach for answering his question, I asked him for like 24 hours. And I was going to get back to him. They didn't have like a P&L or balance sheet that was, available for me to just like go and analyze. So I couldn't actually build a financial model for them, but I knew how to think about any business in terms of their numbers. So I basically constructed like a fake income statement. I went through every single line item on that. And instead of looking at numbers, I thought about, what is the value that I can bring to your business? But I'm going to think about that in terms of a financial model. What are your revenue challenges? What is your cost of sales challenges? What are your like operational challenges below the gross profit line? How are you thinking about hiring and paying your employees? How are you thinking about your real estate leases? All of those things cost money, and to a startup, they can be significant money. I can choose each one of those areas and basically construct 1 to 3 months worth of work for myself. And when I deliver it all back to you, I'm going to give you 1,000 ideas of places that, like, things that you as the COO of this company are probably struggling to get done right now because you're one person, but you can hand any one of those things off to me and I'll be able to run with it, because it's not novel. It's not like I was revealing to him something he didn't know about his business. But the way that I was able to answer his question actually directly came from the fact that I'd spent the last, 5 years thinking about businesses' financial statements, right? It was a framework that I used to answer a question about my relevance to a totally different job and industry.
That is insane. You essentially created your own job in the startup. You were like, hey, you know what? You need me to do this thing that you haven't even been thinking about, or had the energy to think about 100%. And that's a great way to get hired. like very interesting.
Yeah, I think, anybody that's going to interview at a startup, anybody that wants to work at a startup, kind of has to do that. Now, there's like pockets of skill sets that don't. If you're working at a software company and you're a software engineer, there's probably a good chance that you don't have to pitch your value to that company. I'm not a software engineer though, so I had to think about other ways of making sure that a team with 10 ML PhDs from Stanford could look at me and say, yeah, we're supportive of this, because it wasn't just the COO's responsibility for hiring me. They had to get kind of buy-in from a bunch of people on the team. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody there looked at me as somebody that was doing something valuable. And I did have to construct my own job. They were not actually hiring for anybody. They, at least not with my skill set. I kind of approached them. And I think that's true of every startup. If you want to go and work somewhere, there's a job that they are hiring for, and there's a job that you want to do. There's almost certainly a gap between those. There might be a smaller gap for some people than there is for others, but you can always manufacture like the next job that you're going to step into, or you can at least influence it. In order to do that though, you've got to have an opinion about like, what is the job that I want to do? And you've got to be able to pitch it really well. So it's not the easiest thing in the world. Again, I failed a lot of times before I succeeded. I pitched myself to a bunch of startups when I was moving into tech that were just like, we don't want anything to do with you. But, it only takes one working out before you suddenly feel lucky.
Very, very cool. What's your top tip for someone, pitching themselves to a startup? You've done the pitch, you've been a co-founder yourself at a startup in a sense. What do you think is one thing that you looked for and worked for you when you were doing that pitch?
I think the most helpful thing early on in conversations with a startup is, revealing the depth of interest that you have in what they're building or the problem that they're solving. When I was interviewing at Lattice, they were building something that was so complex. I had no idea. I could not describe it to anybody. When my friends at Wharton were asking me like, "Oh, what does this company do that you're so excited about?" I was like, I couldn't actually tell you. Right? One of the founders of that company is a MacArthur Genius grantee award winner or whatever, and I was like, I have no idea what's going on in his head. But in talking with some of the folks that worked at Lattice about the problem that they were solving, it became clear that what they really wanted to do was take a bunch of different pockets of data that sit inside of big companies and make it easier to find connections between them. And so we started talking about what is the interface that you build around that? How do you actually productionize that type of technology into something that's valuable for different types of businesses? And in the process of doing that, I had really strong opinions that I could communicate to the CTO or the CEO or the COO about what I thought they should go and do. I was really adamant that they should not try to sell that software to the finance world. They were like trying to figure out, how do we get a hedge fund to buy this raw technology that can then influence their whole trading strategy? And I'd come from finance, so I was able to say like, look, if you're going to pitch hedge funds, they're going to want exclusivity. They don't want anybody else in the world to have that. So you're going to have one hedge fund client. And I was like really adamant that from a business strategy perspective, that you shouldn't try to like chase that white whale for too long. On the product side, I built things just in my spare time that tried to do something like this. I was sick of building. I was sick of like trying to improve my day-to-day, like efficiency using tools like if this then that, the IFTTT or Zapier. I had used those to like connect my Uber account to Google Sheets because I wanted to make sure that I could see how much I was spending on on Uber each week. And it just sucked, right? I was like over and over again, I have to go and off my account. I have to share my personal data with people. I then have to like configure some kind of Google spreadsheet to do something that is super basic. What if there was software that kind of tied all of these disparate data stores together in my life? What would I be able to do with it? And just being able to talk about that was a totally different customer type than who they were trying to build this for. They were trying to go after like huge enterprises with real like enterprise scale data needs. But I had the micro version of that pain point. I was able to talk about, what would this look like if I was your customer? And that was kind of the jumping off point to a bunch of other more interesting conversations. So I don't think I ever would have been able to do that had I not done research on that company in the first place. And I think anytime that you're going to interview with a company, especially if you've like dropped your application or you dropped your resume into like a formal job application, there's kind of this expectation that like they want me. They have brought me into an interview because they saw something on my resume that is interesting to them. My advice for everybody is like reverse that, right? You've got to understand, you have to have a really strong opinion on what you bring to the table. Even if you have been invited to interview with some company, you're one of many, and they're going to give out a small number of offers relative to the applicant pool that they have. You need to be really kind of precise on what your value is to them. And I think you can do that by, deeply understanding what is it this company is trying to build and solve in the world. That's true of tech companies, but it's also true of like, finance companies, investment banks, private equity firms. They're all trying to do something, and they need to go out and hire people that can do that thing. Understand what their product is, understand how you can help them build that product or think about the market in interesting ways, And it becomes easier to have like real deep conversations with them during the interview process. It stops becoming a conversation about, do you check off the right boxes on your resume? And it starts becoming a conversation about, I'm excited about hiring this person. What could I as the company that is, hiring, do if only this person accepted our offer?
That is a very entrepreneurial way of looking at working somewhere. I love it. I absolutely love that in a way. You also start, your own startup, taking all of this information that you learned working somewhere and all of these experiences to come up with and essentially bring to life something completely new. And that was yours and your brainchild essentially. Tell me a little bit about how and why you founded your startup Centropy, and what was that early process of actually deciding, okay, I want to do this. This is an idea that is meaningful, works, makes sense, and where do you even start with that?
It was definitely a journey, and by journey, I mean it was bumpy. So I'd gone through, a year and a half at Lattice. It got acquired by Apple. I moved over with the team from Lattice to join Apple and stayed there for about a year. I didn't really want to go back to a big company. I'd worked in big companies before. I'd gone through business school specifically to kind of like go into the startup world. So a year into Apple, I was just like, I'm looking for something else. The COO that had hired me at Lattice was a guy named John Redgrave. He did not come over to Apple with the acquisition, but he and I had stayed in touch, and we'd get coffee like every month or so, and we would just kind of talk about anything and everything. About a year in, I was just, I was looking for something else. I did not just want to go and start a company, and in fact, for like a hot second, a friend and I decided to, we were going to like dip our toe into the cryptocurrency world, spend about 3 weeks considering whether we wanted to start a hedge fund that was, taking a different approach to it, and like decided, the smartest decision of my career, decided that we would not do that. And it kind of burned me. That experience was just, there was so much happening in cryptocurrency. Everybody was thinking about like, how do I, take my share of that action? And it left a really bad taste in my mouth. So I actually really didn't want to start a company. I wanted to, to just figure out if there were other companies out there that I could get excited by. And I was trying to pick John's brain on, is there anybody that is building cool stuff that you're aware of that maybe I could go and talk to? And we started just talking about companies, and we started talking about a lot of gaming companies. He was really interested in, like video games at the time. There were some cool like angel investments that he was considering in that space. We were watching a bunch of new games and kind of like trends in the MMO RPG space come out, and we just started talking about it. And what we realized was there were a couple of problems impacting the gaming industry that were not really game specific problems. They were internet problems. They were like society problems. Again, we were having these conversations like over breakfast and coffee, but with no intention of building a company around it. But what we were realizing is that there's certain types of behavior that cause video game experiences to just, become terrible. Cheating in video games, harassment in video games, when you have like text chat or audio chat, it just totally kills the experience. But it's not part of the game. It's part of the gameplay. It's not part of the game experience that somebody tries to go out and design when they're building a new game. We'd seen content moderation through customers that we worked with at Lattice. We started to realize that we actually had experience thinking about how you would solve content moderation and online safety at scale. And we knew people that could build that tech. We knew what that tech looked like. We knew how it worked. We knew what it was good at. We knew what it wasn't good at. And we started to realize that we're talking about a problem that is out in the world that we have experience working on. We have a whole Rolodex of people that know how to build the software that we would design in order to solve that problem. What are we doing here? So that's kind of like the genesis of Centropy. We spent 3 years building that company into a platform to do content moderation at scale, still having humans in the loop. We wanted to make sure that the trust and safety experts that were on the front line of doing content moderation at huge companies like choose your favorite social media company, could take advantage of the huge realms of data that were stored across many different data stores in their company, and use all of that intelligence to do content moderation better, faster, and with more accuracy. And we built a platform to do exactly that. But it kind of started from this point of talking about video games over breakfast, and it turned into a content moderation business that became valuable enough for some other company to go out and buy.
Okay. I know I've said your journey is insane, but that is even more insane. I mean, content moderation in today's world is just like so relevant and so needed in a sense that the fact that you called it, a couple of years early is like, I would say, really great foresight in a sense. And really, I would say, important breakfasts that you must have had in a sense. I can only imagine the depth of conversation and the good food. But, talking about, the startup journey in a sense. I'm someone who loves the world of startups. And I'm actually launching a new venture. Very excited about it. One thing that people always tell me is from the get-go, you have to know your game plan. You have to know your exit. You have to know where you want to evolve it. I am not a believer that you can plan every detail. I think that is just way too much data for my simple-minded brain to process. But I'm sure but I want to hear your thoughts on this. As you were going into this, did you plan out how you wanted to see, the end goal of this organization? Did you know, okay, we're going to get acquired by Discord, maybe not too specifically? Or did you kind of evolve as the business grew with you? Or what combination of those two degrees kind of, made your journey possible?
We definitely did not know every detail. And actually, I think my gut reaction to what you just said is, if you try to know every detail, you're either going to enter your business venture with kind of a sense of false precision. You're going to feel like you know everything that's going to happen, but you can't predict the future that accurately, no matter what diligence you do up front. Or you're going to put blinders on really early, where you actually don't know how the market is going to respond, how customers are going to respond. There's 1,000 operational questions that you can't know for certain, but they're all going to influence every piece of your strategy. And so I think if I were to start a business again today, the only thing that matters is, do I have a deep understanding of the problem that I feel like needs to be solved? And am I passionate about it? We were passionate about content moderation, but we had never actually worked in content moderation. At Lattice, we had built software for companies that were trying to figure out how to do content moderation better, but it wasn't us that was doing the content moderation. And so the first year and a half of Centropy was us trying to figure out, how are people doing content moderation inside of companies like Facebook, Snapchat, Google, and YouTube, non-social media companies like dating companies. How do these companies think about operationalizing this? Because we're going to come in and try to sell them software, but we first have to understand what they're doing today in order to make that pitch convincing. And we didn't understand what that, what was actually being done today. We didn't understand the problem as deeply as we could have. I think we would have probably built Centropy much faster and probably to more success if we had both come from doing content moderation jobs. And so I think understanding the problem is the only thing that matters. Don't worry about exit strategy, right? That will come once you figure out if you're building something that matters to people. But if you try to define what your exit strategy is before you ever start building, you should treat that as like an option, but it's almost certainly not going to be the situation that you end up in. You might end up in something that looks like that, but it's probably not the exact exit strategy. So you get there along the way. If you understand the problem, you know what you need to go and build. You then know how to build a company around that product or whatever service it is that you're providing. And then you can figure out, what does that imply for our TAM, our market potential, our valuation as a company, our exit opportunities. All of that comes, but it kind of starts with, why do we exist? What are we here to solve? And that's really all that matters. I would not focus on anything else. for like the first 12 months of starting a company until you feel like you've got a really solid understanding of what pain point are we trying to solve out in the world.
I love that. There's hope for me still. Thank you. I'm not going to, write my will right away. But I think one of the issues that I face sometimes as a startup owner is you just kind of look at other startups and you think, oh my gosh, like at least me, they're doing something different, or they're moving at a much different pace than I am in a sense. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. But I think for me at the very least, it can be hard to kind of reconcile what my role is in an organization that is growing versus kind of looking externally and seeing all these organizations growing at a different pace and having that bit of insecurity in a sense. How do you make sure, and this is like a very introspective question again, but how do you make sure that you are focusing on how your role plays within the startup as efficiently as possible versus falling victim to imposter syndrome, being in kind of that larger entrepreneurship ecosystem? Because you see people raising rounds, you see people hiring staff, you see people like getting new clients, and at the same time your startup is growing, maybe at a different like pace and direction completely, that it can be hard to not get your wires crossed, or at least in my experience. How do you keep sane, I guess, is the underlying question.
Nobody said that I was sane. There are a lot of parts of building a company that can drive you insane. And if we had this conversation 3 years ago, I think you might have a very different perception of my sanity. But I actually think it's the same answer that I just gave you. Like, yeah, it's like there's a lot of distraction. And when you're building a company, especially in a market where there are others that are doing something that is perceived to be competitive with your product, those distractions often don't feel like distractions. They feel like the most important thing, and it kind of consumes you. You have to you're focused on who's getting funding. That funding means that they're able to go and hire people that we want to hire, or build faster, or steal customers. And it feels like it's the most important thing for you to solve, but they're derivative problems, right? Those problems come out of the fact that that company, that competitor, has been able to articulate the same problem that you're solving and how they plan on solving it effectively to some investor. And it has given them a set of options now that they have this new pool of capital to go and build their business around. It always is going to come back to how strongly do you feel about the problem and the way that you're approaching the solution. If you're building the exact same thing as some competitor, then this becomes, like you're building two hot dog stands on a beach, right? You get to split the market if you have exactly the same feature set, and 50% of you are going to get, the audience on this side of the beach, and 50% of you, or the other competitor is going to get the other 50% of that audience. In the startup world, that's usually not what's happening. You're trying to differentiate based on your solution so that you can go and get 100% of the market, or you can get, some like mega majority of it, because you're doing something that's fundamentally different. When you're going about it that way, I think it is really important to have, it comes back to the problem. You have to understand the problem deeply in order to be able to position your solution as differentiated. And if you can do that, it becomes easier to block out kind of the externalities that are always going to be happening in the background while you're building that company. It allows you to put into context, why did somebody else raise a huge round, or why did this person that I'm trying to hire for this really key role say no to me and go to somebody else? It is the right lens to view all of those, kind of like all of your wins and losses become super understandable if you can tie them back to the product that we're building and why we believe it's the most important in the market. If you start having a bunch of failures, it is probably a good sign to go and evaluate how differentiated your product actually is, or how your target customer base is able to perceive the value of your different, like what you consider to be a differentiated product. Do they understand that is differentiated in some way that is valuable to them? If you're losing hires or sales opportunities, or you're not able to raise funding, someone's not hearing that story, or someone's not believing that story. And the story is always going to be, kind of driven by your root understanding of, why does my thing need to be the way that this is solved in the future world.
Okay, that was really, really well articulated. Earlier you said like, oh, I'm not good at introspective. Like, I don't know if I can bring in the wisdom. You're a complete liar. That's very wise, and very, very insightful. I think you mentioned this. As startup, or as entrepreneurs in a sense, we want to differentiate in one way or another. We're not going to do the exact same thing. What do you think is the thing that you did differently in your startup journey that enabled you to reach the success that you did? Because I believe that there are many people who do brilliant things. They have great products. They solve real problems, but that doesn't necessarily that's not the only component to success in a sense. As you said, there's the way you articulate it. There's kind of the way you go about marketing it. There's the way you go about acquiring customers, acquiring talent. What do you think you did differently that enabled you to kind of pull all those other resources towards where you guys kind of were in a position to have the company acquired?
I think the thing that we did differently also was one of the most challenging aspects of Centropy's go-to-market strategy. I don't want to claim that we were the first ones to do this, but we were definitely on the earlier end of this trend. But content moderation, when we started Centropy in 2018, was super manual, right? There were huge companies like Facebook and YouTube that hired literally tens of thousands of humans out in like India or Southeast Asia to manually review content day in and day out and say like, this is approved to get posted, or this is bad. And it goes into some kind of like triage queue. Both of those companies had built software to make that process a little bit faster, more scalable, but most companies are not Facebook and Google, and they still have content moderation problems. So the aspect of Centropy's go-to-market that was like novel and helped us along the way was that we were one of the first to position this is a tool that anybody can just start using, and it allows you to basically do what Facebook and Google have figured out how to do, because they have a bunch of machine learning engineers on staff that have figured out how to build that tooling. We're building that same tooling for you, but you don't have to go out and hire an ML team. You don't have to build that software. This is like the early mover advantage. We were able to position our solution as something that was technically exciting. This is technology that allows you to do something you've never been able to envision doing before. And a lot of people were like, that's incredible. I want that. But the challenge is like that benefit was also the challenge. When you are early to market, especially with a like technologically differentiated solution, you have to educate the customers on why they should take a bet on doing something that they've never even like considered implementing in how they run their business before. And so a sales process in enterprise software sales might take 3 to 9 months, depending on what exactly you're selling. We were like on the longer end of that spectrum, because we weren't just going in there and saying, hey, here's the box of software that you get when you pay us money. Go and start using it. You guys kind of know what how to do all of that. We had to sit back and give demo after demo. How could you think about using this if you had 5 or 6 content moderators to handle all the content on your platform? What does their work stream look like when they're using our solution versus when they're using what you guys are currently doing today? It takes a long time to do that. And so on the balance, I think the benefit that we got from being early to market with an ML powered platform for content moderation was probably better, probably outweighed the costs that it kind of forced on the business by us being kind of responsible for educating a large part of the market. But I don't know that it was hugely outweighing that cost. It allowed us to have a successful outcome for the company, but a really successful outcome would have been like Centropy became a multi-billion-dollar IPO because what we built was valuable to every single community builder that was emerging in the space from 2018 and beyond. We didn't have that outcome, but I think we were fortunate enough to kind of like time the market correctly enough that we were still able to benefit from the power that ML could bring to content moderation. People were just familiar enough with the concept to go through that pain and figure out if they wanted to adopt it.
No, very, very cool and very relevant, timely, and well thought out. As we wind down, in a sense, as I mentioned, a lot of our audience are entrepreneurs, and at various stages of that, in a sense. Many of them do want to, or at least just getting started, thinking about what do I do to get that $1 billion idea, first of all in their heads, and eventually execute it in a way that is meaningful and that actually works. For all of these entrepreneurs out there listening, what is your final words of advice to them? Is it go back and get an engineering degree? Be very thoughtful on the things that you're doing. Pitch yourself well. You have had so much amazing insights. What do you think is the one thing to wrap us all up with that we can get started with?
Don't jump into building a business just because you want to build a business. There are a lot of people who do that. I know a lot of people who have done that, and it is hard. Building any business is really hard, and especially as one of the founders, one of the first 10 people inside of that company, you deal with a lot more pain than everybody that joins after that. You are responsible for everything, and you're responsible for everything from day one. If that business fails, it is on you, and so you have to constantly help the business avoid failure modes, and that's true regardless of what your idea is. If you jump into that experience and you don't have a really solid idea of what you want to go and do, it's going to be, it's not 10 times harder. It could be 100 times harder. And you don't have to do that, right? It's always your choice whether you want to start a company or not. Nobody is forcing you to do it. Go and start a company when you feel like your own brain is forcing you to solve this. It is such a clear and massive problem that you cannot possibly be satisfied in any other job, and you have to go and solve that, and what the solution looks like. That's my advice, and I think you get there by having experience working out in the world, right? I think it's really hard to be that one person that starts something out of undergrad that turns into a multi-billion-dollar company. Fred Ersham was one of the co-founders of Coinbase, went to undergrad with me. I look at him every day and I'm like, how did he have that foresight, right? It was incredible that he was able to build Coinbase along with Brian Armstrong. It just worked. But that was an exception to the rule, and the rule dominates here. Be really careful and kind of measured in how you think about the timing of when you want to go and jump into some entrepreneurial venture, and build that conviction for where you want to go and take that risk through experience. Go and work at other companies, go and work in another industry for 5 or 10 years, and then you'll have probably better ideas, more ideas, and you'll be able to take that risky jump with less risk because you kind of know exactly what you're going to be doing.
I love that. Very, very nice summary and very, very nice kicking off point. Though a little, I would say, not exactly the first step, but definitely something so needed for entrepreneurship and so needed as you think about being an entrepreneur. I agree. I think sometimes people rush into it like I have to be an entrepreneur now, that they just be an entrepreneur for the sake of being an entrepreneur versus having a problem they really want to solve, or having something that they really, that keeps them up at night. So I really appreciate, you taking the time to share with us. I had so much fun listening to your journey. As I said, you're absolutely an exciting person to talk to because you just have such a real story. And I think it's so relevant to a lot of our audience who hopefully can one day be or have lived an exciting life as you have. So thank you so much for joining on the show, and hopefully you had as much fun as we did listening to you.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation, and hope it's helpful.
All right. And with that, our session for today comes to a close. Thank you to our audience as well for joining us on another episode of Changing Reality. See you again next week, as always. Bye.
Bye.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.